This is what is instead dangerous. Many people don't know what they don't know.
What kind of new job opportunities might arise for INSEAD type people?
So what I can tell you is that your current capabilities are useless in 5 to 10 years. It's very difficult not to feel obsolete. Humans are not replaced by AI. Humans are replaced by humans using AI.
Hi, everybody. Amit, who leads our San Fran area alums and is also a C-level AI exec himself, will also join in later and will help organize the questions. Me, I'm co-president of the Alumni in Florida. So together with Amit, we represent both coasts, let's say, of the US at least. Today's discussion is a private session only for INSEAD Alumni Association members. Heads up on future events. You might have heard of this, but November 9th to 11th, INSEAD will host an Americas conference in San Francisco in and around the INSEAD hub. So please save the dates, November 9th to 11th. I know, Amit, that's close to your heart. I hope to see you all there at the latest. I see a lot of friends and hopefully future friends already in the audience. Welcome to the INSEAD participants today. We have a high-level group of participants as well with us, representing alumni from the US, about half, because originally it was a US event, but in the last days we've opened it internationally, and the group doubled, so over 100 people have signed up. This group includes advisors of various specializations, corporate managers, C-suite leaders, entrepreneurs, investors, and AI practitioners indeed themselves. So people signed up to represent companies including Meta, Uber, Salesforce, and more. So we have actually quite a lot of experts in the room. François, I asked ChatGPT to prepare an introduction for you, and it told me that you wrote 2 important AI books. Congratulations. Except you did not write them. Thomas Siebel, currently CEO of C3 AI, wrote one of them. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum and Mark Benioff of Salesforce praised the other. If you are ghostwriting all of the top AI books, I must congratulate you, though I believe this is a case of hallucination, of which ChatGPT at times has been found guilty. What we've seen is that AI or generative AI convincingly and in perfect English sometimes claims that something is true when in reality it's not. So the AI failed me this time in writing your introduction, but I did take a few notes myself. You are an opinion leader in AI, publishing or editing various important thoughts about AI in business, in Harvard Business Review, MIT and Sloan Management Reviews, regularly in Fortune. You've presented at multiple conferences, for podcasts. You and I have worked together many years ago when I was leading part of BCG in Eastern Europe, and had great experiences there working with tech-oriented companies. You've worked now for BCG for about 30 years, which is fantastic, having started, as I understand, at 12 years old.
It's just a lack of imagination. So
you now lead BCG's Henderson Institute, which is its think tank, but continue to work about up to half-time on hands-on transforming leading global companies through AI implementation and similar efforts. So we're lucky to have you join us as you bring a truly global perspective. As I understand, you've also worked 7 years based in China. And so you have that perspective as well, which is important in AI. In addition, you can share with us what we might learn from Europe in terms of areas like regulation, which is in the last weeks become a very hot topic. You regularly discuss AI issues with leading CEOs and their boards, and have an insider view on what is happening. So we're getting a view that few can have. I'm looking forward to getting beyond the AI hype to give our listeners a private briefing on what is really happening and what it might mean for them, for you personally, for your companies, and maybe even society. So I don't know, François, if you'd like to correct or add to any of that.
Maybe I would like to say that I'm extremely pleased to be with you, because I'm a self-taught person. I don't have an MBA, and more than that, I'm really impressed by this group, and a little bit overwhelmed, I would say, because I have really strong specialists and experts on AI. I would say that what I spend a lot of time on is really to try to understand how tech in general, AI in particular, is impacting business and society. So a lot of my work is as well on how can companies adopt it, how can people adopt AI. And just maybe one point on your ChatGPT hallucination. I had the same conversation with, or it happened, the same thing happened to Karim Lakhani, who is a HBS professor, and he was saying, okay, what? And I asked, and they gave me, let's say, for some pre-reads, and there was an article I authored, but at the same time, it did not exist. However, and this is from time to time the value of hallucination, it was so relevant to do it that he decided to write it. So I think we should from time to time welcome hallucinations.
Yes, absolutely. So let's dive right in. Let's talk about success cases you've seen in generative AI. So I'll say AI in the future. By that, usually I mean generative AI. What were these success cases? What were the related key success factors? Have you seen many examples of entirely new business models enabled by AI?
So I think that there are two things that you're mentioning, because you're mentioning AI, generative AI, where you can have some different elements. I think that generative AI, we can see, of course, some very promising use cases in companies. We've already seen some of them. For instance, I'm currently working with a new material company where we are using generative AI in R&D through inverse design, meaning that you decide what you want as the characteristics of it, and then it proposes some candidates. And I think that we are not at the moment when it is already fully working, but the experiment is extremely successful. Otherwise, I would say that in AI, we've seen many successful opportunities and use cases. For instance, I worked a lot on AI next best actions, which mean that okay, you tell salespeople what they should discuss with the customers. And one example I would love to mention it. It was at consumer goods company. We augmented their salespeople with the sales force. It was in France. The pilot was in France, and it was maybe the only time in the French history that the trade unions asked us to accelerate the deployment. So I think that generative AI is adding a new set of use cases, more about generation, let's say, but it is adding as well on some of them because of the way it is, let's say, framed, as it is, let's say, it is predicting the next word or the next image, whatever, the next number, depending on what it is trained. Basically, it's very good as well at forecasting. So it will have impact. Foundation models will impact some of the use cases that are at the moment made by ML or deep learning algorithms.
What failures have you seen in AI or more generally?
So I think that in AI, and it's interesting because on the flip side of the case I mentioned, the use case I mentioned of augmenting salespeople, sales forces with for next best action, we had a massive failure on marketing reallocation. The reason why it was, let's say, a failure, it has been solved since then, but originally was because the head of marketing, the CMO, felt that he was losing power. because this marketing relocation is okay. Should you do more social media or TV or what? Should you increase, decrease? And while it was a little bit his experience, its learning curve, now it was really changing the power within the organization, because the CFO was now in a position to challenge him much more. And I think that it is something that is really critical. We used to say at BCG that in terms of effort, you have the 10, 20, 70. 10% is for the algo, because it's not that difficult to have a decent algo. Maybe not the best one, but a decent one. 20% more on the infrastructure, the data, and so on. So it's not that easy and so on. But what is really the most difficult one is probably the 70% on change management, on how it impacts people, about the adoption, and over time how you do that. So it's very important to not to consider that AI is just a technological question. It's very often, especially on today on generative AI, it is a strategy question as well, but it is clearly a people and organization question.
So there's some hope for the people in the room that may not be coding the foundation models, but managing the people that leverage the technology. Yeah. So everybody that's joining, welcome. Just to remind, we are recording. We also are taking questions through the chat. Amit is monitoring the chat, so do put your questions in there. I'm going to start off with some questions, and then we'll take some from the audience. François, how best can I, as a CEO, build competitive advantage while avoiding significant dangers in AI?
So I think that you say, or as I said, it's a strategic question. So, but I think the most important element is not just to focus on POCs. What you need to do is really to start with use cases, what we call the unicorn use cases, that are really having a big impact, because otherwise it will be very difficult. If it's not big, basically people won't care. This is the first thing. The second thing that we found, and it is the result of a joint research with MIT, is that basically, so far I would say just above 10% of companies consider that their return on AI investment is significant. So 10% is not a lot. But when we try to understand for this company that was successful, what was making the difference, the fact that it was not about having a strategy, some data scientists and infrastructure. It was not even to make sure that they were able to not only consume but produce AI algorithms. What was really making the difference is when they were able to make human and AI learn from each other. And I was, let's say, the other day on in a bank on the trading floor, and one of the head of the trading floor was telling me that he was using AI, and that basically at the beginning, of course, AI was learning from the traders to try to identify what they were looking at, which information, to eliminate the noise. Then AI was working on its own to make recommendations. But then traders were learning from the AI ideas, because it was triggering new ideas and new information and so on. So you were entering into a very virtuous cycle where everyone is learning from each other, and then after traders are developing new ideas or new strategies, investment strategies, then AI can start it again. And so I think that this ability to work together, to learn from it, is important. And when you talk about generative AI, I think that in the way we will organize workflows, it will be very important that we make sure that the humans are ready and willing to add their value. I give you one example, which is based on an experiment that we are currently working on with Karim Lakhani from HBS, but I work with INSEAD as well. And what we find is that if you trust this ChatGPT in that case too much, basically the results, the outcome compared to what you get the control group that doesn't use it, basically it's lower in terms of quality. However, if there is a real level of supervision, we push people to make sure that they spend the right amount of time, we explain to them what they could do, then it's getting better. So I think that our ability to redefine our workflows in a way where we're adding human plus AI will make a very important point. The other point as well that we need to say, and we're discussing on the hallucination, I'm saying, is sure that this access to external sources helps drastically reduce hallucination and improve the quality, with potentially a massive impact on the way traditional companies might or might not keep contact with their customers.
Let's take a step back. You mentioned use cases. Can you explain what you mean by use cases and what are some key golden use cases that you've seen?
So let's say what I call use cases is really a kind of an application of, let's say, you have to try to have an outcome, and then you do it. So it can be in marketing, doing a marketing campaign. It can be about I mentioned R&D, where really it's drastically reducing the time to develop a product. I mentioned new materials, but it's true in drug development. It's true in, let's say, clinical trials. I'm working on, I was mentioning forecasting, for instance, working as well with a heavy material company, where thanks to generative AI, they are building synthetic data, because let's say their heavy machines basically are very robust, so they don't have that much data, but thanks to it, they are able to train models and to create synthetic data that help them improve their predictive maintenance. So what I call a golden use case is a use case that is really important for you to create a competitive advantage. I really like what, for instance, Microsoft is doing with Copilot. It's very good, but it's not something that will help you create a competitive advantage. Everyone will use it or use its competitors, whatever, but this is not the source of what will make sure that you are successful. And I think that this is where CEOs need to really think about, okay, how do I create a competitive advantage?
As a CEO, then, how do I prepare for AI? How do I best identify this potential, the golden use cases? How do I prepare my people? How do I set up policies?
So I think to identify them, of course, it depends, but I think that you try to think in terms of a domain. So it's not about purely a small use case or idea, but it's really to ask your R&D, and it's from R&D to customer service. Okay, try to think about how you could use it, and it could transform the way you operate in your domain at a high level, and let's say significantly impact your domain. And I think that when you do that, then you realize that you need to rethink the way you work. What I'm mentioning here is not exactly generative AI, but again, next best action in a telco, basically where usually marketers are working in terms of finding the next campaign, developing it with agencies and so on. Now with what I would call always on campaign, we kept the word campaign because this CMO was used to it. Basically, you don't need that anymore, or much less. And therefore, the marketers are here to think about new ideas. what would I sell in terms of my product, in terms of my subscription, what should I add, and to do always on testing, so that then once it's done, you can give it to, let's say, the AI machine that will develop and bring it to a ultra personalized offer. So, I think that it's you need to do and to develop these use cases. I think that in terms of people, we need to recognize, especially if we use to generative AI, that the way people work will be relatively different. For instance, in what we do, especially white collars, 80% of what we do, it is more about, let's say, collecting data, doing the analysis, and so on. And now it will be much faster. If you want to do it, the question you will have to do is more about the art of questioning first, and then the supervision, as I mentioned. It's much shorter, so you might not need exactly the same profile, the same quantity of people. Maybe offshoring is less useful than it used to be. So these are questions that we don't have the answers yet, but it is really a question. So it's important for us to try to keep that in mind. It is really changing the way people are working, and you need to see not only how AI augments humans, but how humans augment AI as well. So and this combination is very important. Regarding the policies on Gen AI, there are plenty of questions, plenty of risks, shadow AI being the first one. There are questions about copyrights, about biases, all of that. And this is why there is and there will be some regulation. The regulation is coming, but beyond that, there is a risk of reputation. But I would say that, and I'm happy to get challenged on that, but I think that at the moment it requires a lot of work, but there are solutions, or you have people working on solutions. So it's a fact that you need to identify them, clarify the one that fit your element, your perspective, but it's more okay, I need to do it, it's painful, all of that, but I do it. There are solutions. So I'm less concerned today than I was, for instance, 7 or 8 months ago when I was working on the topic.
How do I, as a CEO, avoid becoming entirely dependent on big tech giants? NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google. How do I maintain my IP and my competitive advantage?
So I think there is, in my opinion, you need, and this is why it's a strategic question. And for instance, the way you will interact with these large language model providers is very important. If you consider ChatGPT, there are plugins or reducing the level of hallucination, improving the quality. One of my friends at Wolfram, this is a natural language calculation tool, basically helped ChatGPT get 96% of the A level in mathematics in the UK, while ChatGPT usually is more about, let's say, 45 or 48. So it's really improving it. But what is true is that the more you will see these plugins coming, the more ChatGPT could become a kind of a super app, a little bit like the one I used to have in China with WeChat, where you have your entire life that is really, really done. But I would say that because of the natural language processing on top of the foundation model, the NLP, the fact that you speak as if you have the feeling to speak almost to a person, this would be much better in terms of user experience. This is why, for instance, you had Bill Gates saying, let's say last week or something like that, that he believed that it will become a personal assistant, and that, say, when you were saying you want to go back to Amazon, you will just use it as a personal assistant. And that perspective is important, because if you do that, you might lose the direct contact with your data on with your customers. And you know, WeChat takes 40% of transactions. You know what Apple does, between 15 and 30%. So it's important. It's safe. So the way when you create your own plugin, maybe it's good for let's say attackers, or companies that are entering into a new an adjacency or a new business, or small companies. If you're already a large company, maybe it's better for you with a strong customer base. Maybe it's better for you either to embark ChatGPT in your app, like Expedia does it, or it might be even better for you to create something like what let's say Bloomberg did. Basically, their uniqueness is based on 0.7% of the volume of data that was created, that was used to train Bloomberg GPT. However, it is what makes the entire difference, and something quite unique and focused with new features that are not in the current elements. So it's really about what is your relationship with your customers. How do you own your own data? Data will become more important than ever. So it's important for you to identify your current data, making sure what is proprietary, what can be shared, yes, no, and what are the data that I might generate and that I don't have. So I encourage everyone to really think hard about the data they could create. They might be the new source of competitive advantage.
I'm going to ask one more question, then Amit, let's take at least two questions from the audience. So my question is, what should today's listeners be doing to prepare for AI themselves? What will help their skills remain relevant in this new world? What kind of new job opportunities might arise for INSEAD type people?
I think that what we need to realize is that the half-life of capabilities in one generation moved from 26 years to 5 years. So what I can tell you is that your current capabilities are useless in 5 to 10 years. So I think that the real capability is really to learn how to learn. So critical thinking, ability to learn and welcoming change will be really something that is critical. And I was discussing with, let's say, the dean of French business school, not prestigious as INSEAD, and we had this question about, okay, what should we teach to our students? And I think it's a lot about critical thinking. My kids went to college in 2016, so everyone was telling them, okay, in 2015, in the current world, if you learn Chinese and Python, you're good, you will have a job forever. 7 years later, China and the West, their relationship are more challenging. Python, basically now the hottest programming language is English. So I think that the critical thinking, in the sense philosophy, whatever is really what you need to learn and to focus on. At least this is my perspective.
Excellent. Amit, any questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much. Yes, we have a very active chat questions here. I'm going to skip the questions which you've already addressed, François, around skills for kids, etc., and dive straight into the two questions which in no specific order. So I'm going to combine a few questions. Question from Rolf and Shepard together. Should AI be called AI? Is it really artificial intelligence? How real is the hype? Or is it just guys at OpenAI being very smart at driving up the valuation? And similarly, is there an analogy that is most helpful in the understanding the moment we are in now with respect to generative AI? So maybe we can start with that.
So honestly, I think that the word AI is not a good one, because people, when you think about AI, you immediately almost think about it. It's a general AI. And I think that it's basically it's not the right approach, because as I said, at the moment it's more, let's say, a tool. We will see over time, maybe in a decade, in 20 years, I don't know. And I don't think that anyone knows. At the same time, I believe that the way we use intelligence, we think immediately about human intelligence. What is sure at the moment, I don't know if we should call it intelligence, but on some dimensions, AI is superhuman. This is why I'm challenging the word intelligence. I'm not sure that it will replace us. I hope not. But we will have to make sure that we continue to add value, not to get replaced, but because we are so lazy that we might decide to become dependent. I don't think that AI will decide to kill entire mankind. The mankind is strong enough to think about it itself. So I'm not sure that the word is the right word, but at the same time, I believe that the moment we live is a very important one. I believe this is an industrial revolution, because imagine that it's as if every employee had read everything and had an infinite memory. So as we all know, memory, as you mentioned it, Robert, memory, we all know, even for humans, memory is not reliable. But this is where we are. So I think it really drastically changes the environment in the company. So we will have to revisit it absolutely fully. And I think that it's close to what we experienced in maybe in the mid 19th century, or with electricity and so on. So I think that here what OpenAI has done with ChatGPT is the fact that the AI revolution was already starting, but now he made it. OpenAI made it visible to everyone and expanded it, because it's not just for a bunch of experts. Everyone can not only consume or do it, but produce AI. And this is what is in a sense dangerous. Many people don't know what they don't know. And this is why education will be a very important element from governments, and where governments can help.
Amit, another
Great.
question.
Yes, thank you so much. Another question specifically on use cases. So these questions come from Garo and Ken. We talked a little bit about use cases. The questions are, A, what are the highest impact use cases in go-to-market activities within a startup environment? Something that you may have seen or may have come across, François. And the second one following up on that is there or isn't there a strategic risk of building 4 unicorn use cases?
So on the first one, is the startup a tech startup, or is it to use or to sell?
Yeah, I think it's more, good points. It's more specifically around, is there an optimal setup with GPT-4 that startup environment can leverage with specific plugins, etc.?
I think that as a startup, we are back to the question I had, the point I was making. If you are a startup, if you believe that it's important for you to get access to this environment quickly, and you're willing to give, because the critical mass, you will get the critical mass quickly, adding a plugin can be good. You need to realize that you won't have direct access to your customers to a certain extent, or that you will have to pay a big fee at some point to OpenAI if it's a plugin, or to others if it's in a different model, because plugin is a word that is used for OpenAI.
So, Amit, I'm going to sneak in a few questions here. Can you please monitor the chat for more questions? All participants, if you do have questions, please add them there. And after my 2 questions, we'll go back to audience questions. Who wins, François, in the AI age? US, Europe, or Asia, China?
So I know that the one is that is probably not winning is Europe. That's for sure. I think that at the moment what we see a lot is this attempt of decoupling. I'm following a quote from Michael Porter that I like a lot, which is the fact that the competitiveness of a nation depends on the ability of its industry to innovate and upgrade. And what we see is that in terms of innovation overall, US is winning. In terms of adoption, China is winning. Many, and I've been experiencing it there. It's basically most companies have already, a few years back, were already using AI models. Very often in what I call vertical AI ecosystems, meaning that it is related to, let's say, some internet or tech giants. We have what I call the transformers, that are companies that are verticalizing these technologies to make it simpler to get you to get adopted by the traditional ones. And then they get data directly, so it creates a flywheel effect. But one of the reasons why I came back to Europe is I used to say that, in my opinion, Europe today is a little bit like China in the middle of the 19th century, meaning that it is a wealthy society, a little bit self-centered, missing an industrial revolution. So we are talking about this the fact that I believe that industrial revolution, and to a certain extent, to be a bit dramatic, living history. And I think that it's coming. Unfortunately, I'm a European. I like Europe, and but we are really struggling. And we are really struggling because we don't have, let's say, the same model of, let's say, the transformers or the high adoption that we see in China, and we don't have the high, let's say, innovation, and the fact that in the US, traditional companies not always upgrade, but they are replaced by innovative companies. So we think that the Schumpeterian creative destruction cycle is happening in a very fast way, which makes the US society very, or at least the US business community very pushy and very innovative. 3 models, 2 potentially winning and 1 for sure winning.
Two short follow-up questions. How will China develop given U.S. chip and technology restrictions? You were just in China, I think, recently. Do you see any issues with diverging development paths in AI?
What I will say is not, of course, statistical, but I've been discussing a lot with some people in the semicon industry that I know decently well. They were telling me that they don't understand. They echoed what the CEO of NVIDIA said, saying, okay, basically, why didn't the US continue to give us their, let's say, even generation -1 or -2 products, because we were unable, as Chinese, to work together, and now we are obliged to do it, and we might have some promising ideas. So I think that this is a question I had when it happened at the time in the let's say in 2018. Then it has continued to accelerate, but I must admit that now it's I don't know if it will come to fruition, but it's true that it might happen. So I would not bet on the fact that they won't be able to do it.
So the Chinese have been catalyzed to work more together.
Yes, absolutely. It was a main catalyst for them to work more together.
What about the other side of that? I mean, NVIDIA's market cap went up the GDP of Portugal in one day, and NVIDIA is quite dependent, in fact, on Taiwan for actually producing the chips that they design. Are we, as the West, putting ourselves at a risk, like Europe did with Gazprom, with the gas, that we're dependent on in one direction?
Honestly, it's very difficult to tell. What I know is that in Taiwan, people are trying to calm down a bit. Even President Tsai is trying to find a way to orchestrate and to make sure that it works with the Chinese. So I don't know. What is for sure is that for Taiwan, it's this is their life insurance.
Amit, questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have some more questions. As a good segue from China, US, let's talk a little bit about globalization. So this question comes from Elisabetta. We have seen with globalization, first specific technologies as the internet and then policies lagging behind. With AI, how do we, or is there a chance to redesign the relationship between politics and corporations?
That's a big question. So first of all, I would say I doubt. And I will tell you why. Because I think that, and this is really my perspective. So again, I'm not saying it's right. But the reason why I doubt is because at the moment, as the world is fragmenting, for sure AI regulation is coming, but it will be different in different regions. And you could understand it that it's different in different regions. I give you one example. For instance, on data that you could give, healthcare data. We know, for instance, in Europe or in the US, we are very careful about this. But I've been working in Western China, where basically they don't have GPs or good GPs. And believe me, you're more ready when you know that the diagnostic will be much better, or 10 times or 100 times better. You're more willing to give your data to say, okay, I give it, but then there is an algo and I might have the right diagnostic. So even without the world fragmenting, you need to understand that you could have different perspectives on what good means. Point one. Then point two is that in a world where technology becomes critical for it, I don't think it will happen. I believe that especially in the US, as many of you are in the US, it might happen. The government believe, or maybe they could say, okay, let's get whatever giant in species like they did with the Standard Oil. The day they believe it's in the interest of the country and of the population. But I doubt that it will happen in the short term. So this is point one. Point two is the fact that when I discuss with regulators or legislators, they are clearly behind. So it's very difficult for them to conceptualize it, first. Second, when you want to create something like this, it takes time. You need to align different countries' government that might have different interests. And then, in the meantime, things have evolved a lot. So I believe that we will have AI regulation that will be different depending on where we are in the world. I doubt they will really impact large tech giants that much, at least in the short term. Maybe Europe will try to impact them because we don't have any. But I doubt that we will have a real redefinition between policies and politics and giants, because it's in their joint interest. At the same time, I believe that you will see many commissioners or agencies giving fines to companies using AI algorithm. You cannot tell the let's say justice anymore that, oh, you know, it's not me, it's the algo, it's the black box, I don't understand it, so it's not my fault. I think that this accountability for companies using it will be very high. I doubt that the impact on tech giants will be that strong. But that's my personal view, and I'm happy to have different opinions.
Thank you very much. Robert, just checking, do we have time for a few more questions?
I have a few more questions. Let's take maybe two more right now from the audience, and then I'd like to ask some general ones before we go into the extended session.
I saw a UN of AI. Yes.
Yes.
We could dream of it. However, who would say we see how the UN works with people who've been diplomats for years, for centuries, let's say, and we know diplomacy and let's say international relations for centuries. AI, we don't know who would say what is good, what is not good. I was having that discussion with Gabriela Ramos from UNESCO with that published a very good thing, which is sorry, you cannot see it. It's recommendations on the ethics of artificial intelligence. That's very good. As we said at the end of the discussion, it's worth a try, but do we believe it will be successful? I hope so. I doubt.
Amit, take a look through the other questions. I have a few questions so that everybody hears some general thoughts from François. One, how can INSEAD itself best contribute to preparing business leaders for AI?
So I believe there is a really value to educate board of directors, boards. I think that executive, let's say, because it could be good as well for INSEAD, but I think that executive education is really absolutely critical at the moment, and we need to embark it more and more. I used to say that we should create a kind of a driver's license for AI for executives. You know, a driver's license, you don't need to know how the engine works. But it's good to know that if you are pushing on the right pedal, then it accelerates. So I think that trying to better understand and communicate what it is, how it impacts, how you need to rethink your ways of working is something important.
Yeah, as you said, people's knowledge has a half-life of 5 years now.
Yeah.
And that includes the boards as well.
Yes, but the board is maybe even worse, because as many of them had their let's say successes and built their own experience on something that is really now outdated, it's very difficult not to feel obsolete.
So for the audience, are there specific homework assignments you'd give them, specific books or publications or podcasts or things that you wouldn't miss?
I think I would give two potentially. I encourage you to read the book Competing in the Age of AI from Marco INCT and Karim Lakhani. This is a very good one, I believe, to think about how AI, not generative AI, but how AI can work in the company. I encourage everyone to really subscribe to Azim Azhar's Exponential View. It's kind of, if you want a blog, or it's almost a daily newsletter. It's really good.
I mean, in a second, we're going to open it only to questions from the audience. We'll try to get through. Last question I have right now is, François, how do people best reach you? Through LinkedIn?
LinkedIn is the best way to reach out to me.
Cool. Amit, other questions?
We have a few questions. This is around skills and skills replacement. So you addressed earlier, François, around Python being replaced by English as the new programming language, importance of critical thinking for kids. The question is specifically coming from Maxim around the speed of AI replacing key jobs. And very specifically, for the Writers Guild of America, if you were to negotiate on behalf of them, how hard would we fight for the protection of their jobs, given that creativity is so critical and crucial, and essentially saying, you know, is AI replacing the jobs at speed? How fast is it? And if you were to sort of negotiate on behalf of them, how hard would we fight for the protection of their jobs?
Basically, I think there is a good quote as well, or I don't know if it's a reality or if it's hope, but I think it's, at least in the short term, it's reality, that humans are not replaced by AI. Humans are replaced by humans using AI. The ones who are great and that will add and personalize on top of what is made by AI, will be very, very successful. The ones who are average will potentially get replaced, or we will need less of them. But we should not forget that at the moment, let's say generative AI is more a first draft. Of course, through the critical thinking, that it's not just for kids, it's for everyone, I think, critical thinking, and we need to rethink our critical thinking. We need to really see how to prompt, how to cut into pieces, how to better question. I was leading a session at the Delphi Economic Forum, so where, you know, the PT was giving oracles. I think that's time for, this time is back for ancient Greeks, where this is the art of questioning. So I think that it's the ability to question, the ability to improve, but will they get impacted? Yes. And quickly, I mean.
Exactly. Thank you, François. And then one more question, intellectual property management. We talked about ethics. I would love to hear your thoughts on intellectual property management with AI.
So we'll see what, let's say, laws will say over time. What we see that more and more copyrights, you have models that are making sure that they can either tag, make sure that copyrights are identified and so on. So I think it's part of the risks that I was mentioning, shadow AI, biases, copyrights, where there are solutions that are in the making. So I believe it, my point.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Robert, I see a few people dropping off, but that's probably end of the hour for us. So happy to continue on.
Okay, do we have any other questions from anybody?
We have a couple of questions specifically to the AI models, and let me just dive straight into it. So do you think open source beats proprietary models?
That's a very important question. Honestly, at the moment, the jury is still out. You have a question about large models, large proprietary models, or large models and small models, being proprietary or open source. For that, I think that we need to realize the difference in terms of cost. So what we will see is that you will have two different worlds coexisting. You will have probably the very large language models playing the role of what I mentioned, the personal assistant, trying to replace search and so on. And here it will be OpenAI, Microsoft versus Google, maybe Amazon, I don't know, big giants fighting to each other. And at the same time, you will have, and potentially the same, you can look at what Google is doing, Microsoft is doing with smaller models. Why? Because it will be much cheaper to run, and you can add specific features. So I think that we'll have some more niche models, if you want, quite large, but niche models on one hand, and you will have these big ones. Then for open source versus proprietary, I think this is a question about how, when you look at open source, very often, if you want to create a source of advantage or you want to make it happen, you need to make sure that it is modularized. So the question we have to say is that where will it be modularized? Part of the value chain of this can be modularized. We have questions about the architecture, whether it can or cannot, but many of the places can be. So I think that we will have some open source stuff. Will it beat the models? I'm not sure that they will beat the very big ones. Will they compete with a Google version of smaller models specialized in something? Quite likely. It will depend, I believe, on how well they are funded by companies like IBM or others that were not able to build this in a proprietary way. Really in the making.
Yeah.
I don't have a crystal ball.
One point from Gayatri, if the recording will be shared. I'll hand it over to you, Robert, because you mentioned the recording
Yes.
will be shared.
So just to remind you again, November 9th to 11th, we do hope to see you in San Francisco, and to finally meet you live there with the team. Now, Amit, also thank you. I know you have to drop off for helping today.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Let's maybe do this again. Now, Francois, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's late. You're in Paris today.
It's much less late than for you or in Singapore.
I am in Singapore today. That wasn't planned when we set this up, but luckily in a few hours today, I'm going to the beach in Phuket, so I'll be okay, I think.
Okay, I guess so. Thank you so much for welcoming me.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining. If you liked the session, also do let me know if you have ideas for other sessions. People we talked to. Maybe we have François on again. I don't know if you'd at some point in the future be open to a refresh.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you want to do maybe in a year from now, so that you will be able to tell me that what I said was stupid.
Yeah, we'll put what François said today to what future François AI says, and then you have to react to that.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.